The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the Oregon wilderness in shades of orange and gold. Walking Bear moved silently through the tall grass, his moccasined feet making no sound on the dusty trail that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. He had been traveling for 3 days now, following the ancient pathways his grandfather had shown him as a boy. The Modoc warrior carried only what he needed: a water pouch, dried salmon, his bow, and the memories of a village that no longer existed. The wind carried strange scents today. Smoke, but not from cooking fires. Fear, sharp and bitter on the evening air. Walking Bear paused, his dark eyes scanning the landscape ahead. Something was wrong. In his 25 winters, he had learned to trust these feelings. They had kept him alive when the blue-coated soldiers came to his village 2 seasons ago. As he crested a small hill, the source of the smoke became clear. Below him, scattered along the trail, lay the remains of 3 covered wagons. The white canvas tops were torn and blackened, and broken wheels lay scattered like the bones of some great beast. No movement came from the wreckage, no sounds of life. Walking Bear's jaw tightened. He had seen this before, the work of raiders who preyed on the wagon trains that crossed through this territory. He approached carefully, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. Experience had taught him that sometimes survivors hid among the dead, and sometimes the dead were not as dead as they appeared. The first wagon held only silence and shadows. Scattered belongings told the story of a family's dreams cut short. A child's doll with golden hair, a woman's mirror cracked down the middle, a man's Bible with pages fluttering in the breeze like dying birds. The second wagon was worse. Walking Bear closed his eyes briefly and whispered a prayer for the spirits of those who had died here. He would not disturb their rest by looking too closely. The third wagon sat apart from the others, and as he approached it, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Crying. Soft, heartbroken sobs that seemed to echo across the empty prairie. Walking Bear moved toward the sound, his steps quick but careful. Behind the overturned wagon, partially hidden by a pile of scattered grain sacks, he found her. A small girl, perhaps 7 or 8 winters old, sat with her arms wrapped around her knees. Her dress had once been blue like a summer sky, but now it was torn and stained with dust and tears. Her light brown hair hung in tangled waves around a face streaked with dirt and sorrow. She looked up as his shadow fell across her, and Walking Bear saw eyes the color of spring grass, wide with fear and loss. For a moment they stared at each other, the Modoc warrior and the white child, 2 people from different worlds brought together by tragedy. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I tried to hide like Mama told me to." Walking Bear knelt slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. He had learned some English from traders who came through his territory, though he spoke it carefully, choosing each word like he would choose arrows for a hunt. "I will not hurt you, little one," he said softly. "Where is your family?" The girl's lower lip trembled and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. They're all gone. The bad men came and there was so much shooting and screaming. Mama told me to hide under the wagon and not come out no matter what I heard, but I got scared when it got quiet and I looked and..." Her words dissolved into sobs. Walking Bear felt something twist in his chest, a pain he remembered from the day his own village was destroyed. He had found his little sister much like this, crying in the ruins of their home. But he had been too late to save her. Perhaps this time would be different. "What is your name, child?" he asked gently. "Emma," she hiccuped. "Emma Crawford. We were going to Oregon to start a farm with my uncle. Papa said we'd have apple trees and chickens and maybe even a cow." Her voice grew smaller. "But now there's nobody left to plant the apple trees." The sun was sinking lower and Walking Bear knew they could not stay here. The raiders might return and night would bring wolves and other dangers. But he also knew he could not leave this child alone. His grandmother had taught him that all children belonged to the tribe, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they spoke. "Emma," he said, testing the strange name on his tongue. "My name is Walking Bear. I am of the Modoc people. I cannot bring back your family, but I can keep you safe. Will you trust me?" Emma studied his face for a long moment. She saw kindness in his dark eyes and something else, a sadness that matched her own. Slowly she nodded. Walking Bear reached out his arms. "Come then, little one. You cannot stay here." Emma hesitated for just a moment, then allowed herself to be lifted. Walking Bear was surprised by how light she was, how fragile she felt in his arms. He could feel her heart beating like a frightened bird against his chest. "You're safe now," he murmured, the English words feeling strange but important on his lips. "I promise you, you are safe." As he carried Emma away from the destroyed wagon train, Walking Bear found himself wondering what the spirits had planned. He had been traveling to find a new place for his own displaced people, somewhere they could rebuild their lives away from the soldiers and settlers who had taken their land. Now he carried this white child, this remnant of the very people his own tribe had reason to fear and distrust. But as Emma's sobs gradually quieted and she rested her head against his shoulder, Walking Bear realized that some things were bigger than the divisions between peoples. Some things, like the duty to protect the innocent, transcended all boundaries. The trail ahead was long and uncertain, but for now, this small life in his arms was safe. And sometimes, in a world full of violence and loss, that had to be enough. Walking Bear traveled through the night, Emma sleeping fitfully in his arms. When she grew too heavy, he fashioned a carrier from his blanket and some rope, securing her safely to his back. The child stirred occasionally, whimpering in her sleep, but did not fully wake. He was grateful for this small mercy. The fewer questions she asked about where they were going, the better, since he was not entirely sure himself. As dawn painted the sky pink and purple, Walking Bear found what he was looking for: a hidden canyon his people had used for generations as a resting place. A small stream ran through its center, and cave openings dotted the rocky walls like watching eyes. More importantly, it was defensible, with only one way in or out that could be easily guarded. He settled Emma on a flat rock near the stream and gently shook her awake. She opened those green eyes slowly, confusion clouding her features until memory crashed back like a cold wave. She sat up quickly, looking around wildly. "Where are we? Where's my papa?" Walking Bear knelt beside her, his voice gentle but firm. "Emma, remember what I told you. Your family has gone to the spirit world. You are with me now, and you are safe." Emma's face crumpled, but this time her tears came silently. Walking Bear had seen this before. The moment when a child realizes that their old life is truly gone and cannot be brought back. It was perhaps the most heartbreaking moment in any young person's life. "I'm hungry," she whispered after a while, and Walking Bear was relieved to hear this basic need expressed. Hunger was something he could address. He showed her how to drink safely from the stream, cupping the clear water in her small hands. From his pack he produced dried salmon and some berries he had gathered the day before. Emma wrinkled her nose at the unfamiliar food but ate it without complaint. She was learning quickly that her old world of familiar meals and comfortable beds no longer existed. "What's going to happen to me?" she asked between small bites of salmon. Walking Bear considered his words carefully. "For now you will stay with me. I will teach you how to live as my people live, how to find food and water, how to read the signs of weather and danger. When you are older and stronger, we will decide what comes next. Will you take me to my uncle in Oregon?" Papa had a letter with his name, Uncle Thomas Crawford in Salem. The hope in her voice made Walking Bear's heart ache. He had traveled enough to know that Salem was many days away, through territory controlled by hostile tribes and patrolled by soldiers who shot first and asked questions later. A Modoc warrior traveling with a white child would be seen as either a kidnapper or a killer by both sides. "Perhaps," he said finally. "But first you must learn to survive. The trail to Oregon is dangerous and you are very small." Emma nodded solemnly, seeming to understand that her survival now depended on accepting this strange new reality. "Will you teach me to be Indian?" Walking Bear smiled at her innocent question. "I will teach you to be strong. I will teach you to listen to the wind and read the tracks of animals. I will teach you which plants heal and which ones harm. These things will serve you whether you live with red people or white people." Over the following days, Walking Bear began Emma's education in survival. He showed her how to weave grass into a sleeping mat, how to identify edible roots and berries, how to move silently through the forest. Emma proved to be a quick learner, though her small hands struggled with tasks that seemed simple to him. The most difficult lesson came when Walking Bear tried to teach her about danger. "There are people who would hurt both of us," he explained one evening as they sat by their small fire. "Some white men hate all Indians and would kill me on sight. Some red men hate all whites and would do the same to you. We must be very careful about who we trust." "But you trusted me," Emma pointed out with the simple logic of a child. "You are a child," Walking Bear replied. "Children are innocent. They have not yet learned to hate. Emma considered this. My papa said some Indians were bad, but some were good. He said it was the same with white people. Maybe most people are just scared. Walking Bear was struck by the wisdom in her words. From the mouth of a child came understanding that seemed to escape most adults. Your papa was a wise man. As the days passed, an unexpected friendship began to bloom between them. Emma chattered constantly, filling the silence with stories about her family, her dreams of apple trees, her fear of spiders, and her love of rain. Walking Bear found himself telling her stories too. Legends of his people, tales of Coyote the trickster, explanations of why the stars moved across the sky. Do your people have children? Emma asked one day as she practiced starting a fire with flint and steel. We did, Walking Bear said quietly. I had a little sister named Bright Star. She was about your age. What happened to her? Walking Bear was silent for a long moment. The soldiers came to our village. They said we had to leave our land and go to a place called a reservation. Some of our warriors fought back. Many people died. He stared into the distance. Bright Star was playing by the river when the shooting started. A stray bullet. Emma abandoned her fire-making and came to sit beside him. Without words, she leaned against his arm in a gesture of comfort that reminded him powerfully of his lost sister. I'm sorry about Bright Star, she said softly. Maybe she and my mama and papa are playing together in the spirit world. The simple faith in her voice brought unexpected tears to Walking Bear's eyes. Perhaps they are. That night, as Emma slept curled up in her grass mat, Walking Bear made a decision that would change both their lives. He could not replace his lost sister, and he could not return Emma to her lost family. But perhaps in caring for this child, he could honor both their memories. Perhaps in teaching her to survive, he could learn to live again himself. The next morning brought new challenges. Smoke rose from the prairie to the east, a sign that others were traveling through the territory. Walking Bear needed to determine if these newcomers were friends, enemies, or simply travelers who should be avoided. Emma's survival might depend on this knowledge. Stay hidden, he told her as he prepared to scout the area. If I do not return by sunset, follow the stream north until you reach the big river, then look for the settlement there. Emma grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me alone again. Walking Bear saw his own fears reflected in her green eyes, and he made another decision that surprised him. Then you will come with me. But you must do exactly as I say when I say it. Can you promise me this? Emma nodded eagerly, and Walking Bear began preparing for their most dangerous journey yet, venturing out into a world where their unlikely partnership might cost them both their lives. A roaming Modoc discovered a crying girl beside the dusty trail. He lifted her gently. You're safe now. Walking Bear moved like a shadow through the tall grass, Emma close behind him, following exactly in his footsteps as he had taught her. The smoke they had seen earlier now revealed its source. A small group of travelers had made camp near a grove of cottonwood trees about 2 miles from their canyon hideout. From their hiding place behind a fallen log, Walking Bear studied the strangers carefully. 3 men sat around a small campfire, their horses grazing nearby. They wore the clothes of traders or trappers, not soldiers, which was encouraging. But something about their manner made Walking Bear uneasy. They kept looking around nervously, and their weapons lay within easy reach. These were men expecting trouble, or perhaps men who brought trouble with them. Emma pressed close to his side, barely breathing. She had learned quickly that silence could mean the difference between life and death in this new world. Walking Bear held up one finger, then pointed to his eyes, then to the strangers. Wait and watch. One of the men stood and stretched, and Walking Bear caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Hanging from the man's belt alongside his knife and pistol was a child's hair ribbon. Blue silk, the same color as the dress Emma had been wearing when he found her. It could be a coincidence, but Walking Bear had learned not to believe in coincidences when it came to survival. The man called out to his companions. We should move on soon. Don't want to be caught out here after dark with those savages roaming around. You worry too much, Jake, replied one of the others, a heavy-set man with a beard. That Modoc warrior is probably long gone by now. Besides, what's one Indian against 3 armed men? Walking Bear's jaw tightened. They were hunting him. But how did they know he was in the area? And why were they so interested in finding one lone warrior? The answer came from the 3rd man who had been silent until now. The girl's got to be worth something to somebody. Her uncle in Salem posted a reward notice in every town between here and Oregon City. $500 for information leading to her safe return. He laughed harshly. Of course, he don't need to know what condition she's in when we find her. Emma's sharp intake of breath was so quiet that only Walking Bear heard it, but he felt her whole body stiffen with fear. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a reminder to stay silent. These men were not just after him. They were bounty hunters seeking Emma. And from their conversation, Walking Bear understood that they had no intention of returning her safely to her family. "You really think that Indian took her?" asked the bearded man. "Could be she just wandered off and died somewhere." "Tracks don't lie," Jake replied. "Found moccasin prints at the wagon train, adult size, leading away from where the girl was hiding. And I found this." He held up the blue ribbon, and Emma's hand went instinctively to her hair where it had once been tied. Walking Bear realized with a chill that he had made a mistake. In his concern for Emma's immediate safety, he had not thought to cover their tracks well enough. These men were experienced trackers, and they had been following the trail he had left. He cursed himself silently for the error that might now cost both their lives. The men began breaking camp, and Walking Bear made a quick decision. They could not outrun 3 mounted men, and they could not hide in the canyon forever. Their only hope was to reach the river settlement Emma had mentioned, where there might be law-abiding people who would help them. But to do that, they would have to move faster than these hunters could track them. He touched Emma's shoulder and pointed back toward their hideout. They crawled backwards through the grass, moving with painful slowness to avoid detection. Only when they were well out of sight did Walking Bear risk whispering to Emma, "Those men are hunting for you. They want to take you, but not to your uncle. Do you understand?" Emma's face went pale, but she nodded. "They're bad men like the ones who hurt my family?" "Yes, we must leave this place tonight. Can you walk a long way in the dark?" "I can do whatever you need me to do," Emma replied with a courage that amazed him. In just a few days, she had grown from a terrified child into someone who understood that survival required strength she never knew she had. They spent the afternoon preparing for the journey. Walking Bear gathered all the supplies they could carry, while Emma practiced moving silently and following hand signals. As the sun set, they began their escape, heading north along the stream that would eventually lead them to the Columbia River. The first part of the journey went well. They moved through familiar territory, and Walking Bear was confident in his ability to cover their tracks on rocky ground and in the water. But as they left the area he knew well, the challenge became greater. Every sound could be pursuit, every shadow could hide danger. Around midnight they stopped to rest in a grove of pine trees. Emma was exhausted, but she had not complained once during their grueling pace. Walking Bear gave her water and a small portion of dried meat, saving the larger share for himself since he needed strength to keep them both alive. "Are we going to make it?" Emma asked quietly. Walking Bear looked at this small girl who had already endured more hardship than many adults faced in a lifetime. Her green eyes held no self-pity, only determination and trust in his ability to protect her. "Yes," he said firmly, "we are going to make it." But even as he spoke the words, Walking Bear heard something that filled him with dread, the distant sound of horses moving through the darkness. The bounty hunters had found their trail and were following it even at night. They were getting closer. Walking Bear quickly gathered their belongings and helped Emma to her feet. "We must move faster now," he whispered. "Stay close to me and step only where I step." They plunged deeper into the forest, abandoning the easy path along the stream for the more difficult route through dense undergrowth. Branches caught at their clothes and scratched their faces, but they pressed on. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew closer. Emma stumbled and fell, scraping her knee on a sharp rock. Tears of pain and exhaustion filled her eyes, but she made no sound. Walking Bear lifted her gently, just as he had that first day beside the wagon train. "You're safe now," he whispered, though he was no longer certain it was true. As he carried Emma deeper into the unknown darkness, Walking Bear realized that their greatest test was just beginning. The hunters behind them were relentless. The forest ahead was full of dangers, and he was responsible for a child who depended on him for everything. But he also realized something else. In saving Emma, he had found a purpose that gave meaning to his own survival. Whatever happened next, he would not let her down. The night pressed around them like a living thing, and somewhere in the darkness, their enemies drew closer with every passing hour. A roaming Modoc discovered a crying girl beside the dusty trail. He lifted her gently. "You're safe now." Dawn found Walking Bear and Emma huddled together beneath a rocky overhang, both exhausted from their night-long flight through the wilderness. Emma's small body shivered against him, and Walking Bear realized that her thin dress and worn shoes were no protection against the mountain cold. He wrapped his blanket around her more tightly and tried to plan their next move. The sound of horses had faded during the night, but Walking Bear knew their pursuers had not given up. The bounty hunters were probably resting now, waiting for daylight to pick up the trail again. He and Emma had perhaps a few hours' head start, no more. "I'm cold and hungry," Emma whispered, her teeth chattering. Walking Bear looked at their dwindling supplies. They had water, but only enough food for perhaps one more day. The river settlement was still at least 2 days away, maybe 3 at the pace they could manage with Emma's small legs. He needed to find food, but hunting would take time they could not afford to lose. "Can you be brave a little longer?" he asked her. Emma nodded, though her lips were blue with cold. "Mama always said I was tough for a girl. She said I got it from Grandma Crawford, who walked all the way from Missouri to California when she was pregnant with Papa." Walking Bear smiled at her fierce spirit. "Your grandmother sounds like a warrior woman. We will need her strength today." He helped Emma to her feet, and they resumed their journey. The terrain was growing more difficult as they climbed into the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. The stream they had been following split into several smaller creeks, and Walking Bear had to choose their path carefully. One wrong turn could lead them into a dead-end canyon, or away from the river entirely. As they walked, Walking Bear taught Emma more survival skills. He showed her how to spot edible plants, how to read animal tracks, and how to find north when the sun was hidden by clouds. Emma absorbed every lesson with the intensity of someone who understood that this knowledge might save her life. "Why are you helping me?" she asked as they stopped to rest beside a small waterfall. "I mean, I know you're a good person, but my papa always said that Indians and white people were, well, that they didn't usually help each other." Walking Bear considered how to answer. "Your father was right that our peoples often fight, but my grandmother taught me that children belong to all people, not just to their own tribe. She said that protecting the innocent is what separates humans from animals." "Was your grandmother wise?" "Very wise. She lived through many winters and saw much pain, but she never became bitter or cruel. She said that hatred is a poison that hurts the one who carries it more than the one it is meant for." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I think I would have liked your grandmother." "She would have liked you too, little one." Their moment of peace was shattered by the sound of voices echoing off the canyon walls. The bounty hunters had found their trail again. Walking Bear grabbed Emma's hand, and they scrambled up the steep rocks beside the waterfall, seeking higher ground where they might have a better chance of hiding or defending themselves. The climb was brutal. Emma's soft hands were soon bleeding from the sharp rocks, and her breath came in short gasps as they ascended. But she never asked to stop, never complained about the pace. Walking Bear marveled at her courage and determination. They reached a narrow ledge about 50 feet above the canyon floor, just as the 3 hunters came into view below. Walking Bear pressed Emma back against the rock wall and signaled for absolute silence. Below them, the men studied the ground around the waterfall. "Tracks end here," Jake announced, frustration clear in his voice. "Looks like they went into the water." The bearded man, whom the others called Morton, spit tobacco juice onto the rocks. "Could have gone upstream or downstream, or maybe they climbed up beside the falls." The third man, a thin fellow called Sykes, looked up toward their hiding place. Walking Bear felt Emma tense beside him, but they remained perfectly still. After what seemed like hours, Sykes looked away. "We should split up," Morton suggested. "Cover more ground." "No," Jake replied firmly. "That Indian's a fighter. We stay together or we might end up dead. Besides, they can't have gone far with the girl slowing them down. She's just a kid. She'll be tired, hungry, probably crying for her mama." Walking Bear felt Emma's anger at this dismissal of her strength, but she remained silent. Below them, the hunters made camp, apparently planning to wait and see if their quarry would reveal itself. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and the rocky ledge became uncomfortably hot. Emma's lips were cracked with thirst, but they dared not move to find water. Walking Bear watched the men below and tried to plan an escape route. As afternoon wore on, one of the hunters, Sykes, began climbing up beside the waterfall to get a better view of the area. Walking Bear's hand moved to his knife. If the man came much closer, he would have to act to protect Emma. Sykes was only 20 feet below them when something unexpected happened. A mountain lion, disturbed from its afternoon rest, appeared on a ledge across the canyon. The great cat's golden eyes fixed on the men below, and it let out a low growl that echoed off the rocks. The hunters immediately forgot about searching and focused on the new threat. Morton raised his rifle, but Jake knocked the barrel aside. "Don't shoot unless it attacks," he hissed. "Gunfire will carry for miles. Every Indian in the territory will know where we are." The lion studied the humans for a long moment, then padded silently back into the rocks. But its appearance had given Walking Bear an idea. If they could not escape unseen, perhaps they could use the hunter's own fears against them. As evening approached, the men below finally decided to move on, following the stream downstream in search of an easier trail. Walking Bear and Emma waited until they were well out of sight, then carefully climbed down from their rocky refuge. "My hands hurt," Emma said, looking at her scraped palms. Walking Bear examined her injuries and applied some healing herbs he carried in his pack. "You were very brave today. Your grandmother's warrior spirit is strong in you." Emma smiled at the compliment, but Walking Bear could see exhaustion in every line of her small body. They needed food, rest, and shelter. But most of all, they needed to reach safety before their pursuers caught up again. As darkness fell, they resumed their journey, following animal trails through terrain that grew more treacherous with each step. Walking Bear carried Emma when the path became too difficult for her short legs, and she never once complained about the bumpy ride or the slow pace. "Tell me a story," she whispered, as they walked through the moonlit forest. "Tell me about Coyote." So Walking Bear began the tale of how Coyote stole fire from the spirits to give to the people, his voice low and soothing in the darkness. Emma listened with complete attention, and for a while they could both forget the danger that stalked them through the wilderness. But even as he spoke of ancient heroes and magical adventures, Walking Bear knew that their real-life story was far from over. Somewhere behind them, 3 dangerous men were still hunting, and ahead lay unknown perils. The next day would test them both in ways they could not yet imagine. A roaming Modoc discovered a crying girl beside the dusty trail. He lifted her gently. "You're safe now." The morning brought both hope and despair. Walking Bear and Emma had finally reached the Columbia River, its wide waters stretching toward the distant mountains like a silver highway. On the far shore, smoke rose from chimneys in what appeared to be a substantial settlement, their destination and possible salvation. But between them and safety lay the broad river, running fast and deep with spring snowmelt from the mountains. Emma stood on the rocky bank, her green eyes wide as she took in the rushing water. "It's so big," she whispered. "How do we get across?" Walking Bear studied the river carefully. In summer, there might be shallow places where they could wade across, but the spring floods had turned even the usually calm stretches into dangerous torrents. Swimming was out of the question. The water was too cold and fast, and Emma was too small to survive such an attempt. "There," he said, pointing upstream about a mile. "I see what might be a ferry landing. If we can reach it, perhaps someone will help us cross." They began walking along the riverbank, but their progress was slow. Emma's strength was nearly exhausted after 3 days of constant travel and little food. She stumbled frequently, and Walking Bear could see that her small body was reaching its limits. "I can't walk much more," she admitted quietly, and Walking Bear heard the shame in her voice at what she saw as weakness. "You have walked farther than many warriors twice your age," he assured her. "There is no shame in being tired." He fashioned a simple travois from branches and his blanket, creating a way to drag their few supplies while carrying Emma on his back. It slowed them down even more, but at least they were still moving toward potential safety. As they neared the ferry landing, Walking Bear spotted something that made his heart sink. 3 familiar figures sat on horseback near the wooden dock, clearly waiting for something or someone. The bounty hunters had somehow gotten ahead of them and were watching the only obvious crossing point. "They're already here," Emma said, having spotted them as well. "What do we do now?" Walking Bear pulled back into the shelter of some large boulders to consider their options. The hunters controlled the ferry, which meant that crossing openly was impossible. But as he studied the scene more carefully, he noticed something interesting. The ferry itself was on the far side of the river, and there appeared to be some kind of commotion in the settlement beyond. "Something has happened over there," he murmured. "Look at the smoke. That is not just cooking fires." Emma squinted across the water. "It looks like a big fire. Maybe a building burning." Walking Bear realized this might be their chance. Whatever was happening in the settlement would likely distract anyone on their side of the river as well. But they would need a boat, and the only one he could see was a small fishing canoe pulled up on the shore about half a mile downstream from where the hunters waited. "Can you swim at all?" he asked Emma. She nodded. "Papa taught me in the pond back home, but not in water like this. We will not need to swim far, I hope, but we must get to that boat without being seen." They waited until the sun was directly overhead, when the heat haze rising from the rocks would help conceal their movements. Then they began a careful crawl downstream, staying low among the boulders and driftwood that littered the riverbank. The journey to the canoe took over an hour, but they reached it undetected. Walking Bear examined the small craft carefully. It was old but appeared sound, with a paddle secured under the seats. More importantly, it was just large enough to hold both of them. "When we get in the water, you must lie down in the bottom of the boat," he instructed Emma. "The current will be very strong and the boat will rock. Do not try to help. Just hold on tight and trust me to get us across." Emma nodded, her face pale but determined. "I trust you." They pushed the canoe into the water and climbed aboard. Immediately, Walking Bear felt the tremendous power of the current grabbing the small boat and pulling it downstream. He paddled with all his strength, angling across the flow rather than fighting it directly. The crossing was terrifying. The river seemed to reach up and grab them with invisible hands, spinning the canoe and threatening to capsize them at any moment. Emma lay curled in the bottom of the boat, her eyes squeezed shut and her hands gripping the wooden gunwale so tightly her knuckles were white. Halfway across, disaster struck. A hidden log, probably washed down from the mountains, scraped along the bottom of the canoe and punched a small hole in the hull. Water began seeping in, and Walking Bear realized they had only minutes before the boat would sink. "Emma," he called over the roar of the river, "we are taking on water. When I tell you, you must grab onto me and hold tight. Do not let go no matter what happens." Emma opened her eyes and saw water pooling around her feet. Her face went white with terror, but she nodded and prepared to follow his instructions. Walking Bear paddled with desperate strength, aiming for a small beach on the far shore. The canoe was sitting lower in the water now, waves sloshing over the sides. Just as he felt the boat beginning to founder completely, the bow scraped against gravel. "Now," he shouted. Emma launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck as he struggled to pull the sinking canoe up onto the beach. They collapsed together in the shallow water, both gasping and shivering from cold and fear. "We made it," Emma breathed, hardly believing they had survived the crossing. Walking Bear looked back across the river. In the distance, he could see the 3 hunters still waiting at the ferry landing, unaware that their quarry had escaped. But even as he felt relief at putting the river between them and their pursuers, he realized they now faced new challenges. The settlement ahead was indeed in chaos. The large fire Emma had spotted was consuming what appeared to be the main trading post, and people were running back and forth with buckets, trying to save nearby buildings. In all the confusion, no one had noticed 2 bedraggled figures emerging from the river. "What do we do now?" Emma asked. "Should we tell them about the bad men?" Walking Bear considered this carefully. In a crisis like this, strangers would be viewed with suspicion, especially a Modoc warrior traveling with a white child. But they needed help. Food, shelter, and most importantly, someone in authority who could send word to Emma's uncle in Salem. "We will find the person in charge and tell them your story," he decided. "But we must be very careful how we approach them. Some people shoot first and ask questions later." As they walked toward the burning settlement, Emma slipped her small hand into Walking Bear's larger one. "Thank you for taking care of me," she said simply. "I know you didn't have to." Walking Bear squeezed her hand gently. "Taking care of you has taught me something important, little one. It has taught me that family is not always about blood. Sometimes it is about choosing to love someone who needs love." Emma smiled up at him, and for the first time since he had found her beside the destroyed wagon train, Walking Bear began to believe that they might both survive this ordeal. But as they approached the chaotic settlement, he had no idea that their greatest test still lay ahead, and that the choice between Emma's safety and his own freedom would soon force him to make the most difficult decision of his life. A roaming Modoc discovered a crying girl beside the dusty trail. He lifted her gently. "You're safe now." The settlement of Cascade Falls was in complete chaos when Walking Bear and Emma arrived. The trading post fire had spread to 2 nearby buildings, and everyone in town seemed to be either fighting the flames or trying to save their possessions. In the confusion, no one paid attention to the unlikely pair making their way through the smoky streets. Walking Bear guided Emma toward what appeared to be the largest remaining building, a 2-story structure with a sign reading Cascade Falls Inn. If there was a person in authority in this settlement, they would likely be found there, trying to coordinate the firefighting efforts. As they approached the inn, a well-dressed woman emerged from the front door, calling out orders to a group of men carrying buckets. She was perhaps 40 years old with graying brown hair pinned back severely, and intelligent blue eyes that missed nothing as they surveyed the crisis. "Mrs. Anderson," one of the men called to her, "the fires jumped to the blacksmith shop. We're going to lose the whole north side of town if we don't get it under control soon." The woman, Mrs. Anderson, looked around desperately. "Where is that firefighting equipment we ordered from Portland? It was supposed to arrive last week." Walking Bear realized this woman was someone with authority and influence in the settlement. Taking a deep breath, he approached her with Emma close by his side. "Excuse me," he said in his careful English. "We need help." Mrs. Anderson turned and her eyes widened as she took in the sight of the Modoc warrior and the bedraggled white child. Her hand moved instinctively toward the small pistol at her belt, but something in Walking Bear's manner stopped her from drawing it. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Where did you come from?" "My name is Walking Bear of the Modoc people. This is Emma Crawford. Her family was killed by raiders 4 days ago. I found her and have been protecting her." Mrs. Anderson's eyes moved to Emma, taking in the child's torn dress, scraped hands, and exhausted appearance. Whatever she saw there convinced her that this was not a trick or trap. "Emma Crawford?" she repeated. "Are you Thomas Crawford's niece? The one whose uncle posted the reward notices?" Emma nodded weakly. "Yes, ma'am. Uncle Thomas in Salem. Papa said he had a farm there." Mrs. Anderson's demeanor changed completely. She knelt down to Emma's level, her stern face softening with concern. "Child, half the territory has been looking for you. Your uncle has been frantic with worry." She looked up at Walking Bear with new respect. "You saved her life, didn't you?" "I did what anyone should do for a child in need," Walking Bear replied simply. Before Mrs. Anderson could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the river. Shouts and the sound of horses carried over the noise of the firefighting efforts. Walking Bear's blood ran cold as he recognized one of the voices. Jake, the leader of the bounty hunters. "They must have found a way across," he murmured to himself. Mrs. Anderson caught the worried tone in his voice. "Who must have found a way across?" Quickly, Walking Bear explained about the 3 men who had been hunting them. Men who claimed to want to return Emma to her family, but who had made it clear they had other intentions. As he spoke, Mrs. Anderson's face grew darker with anger. "Bounty hunters," she spat. "We've had trouble with their kind before. They care nothing for the people they claim to be helping, only for the money." She stood and called out to several of the men nearby. "Joe, Frank, come here quickly." 2 large men approached, their faces blackened with soot from fighting the fire. Mrs. Anderson spoke rapidly to them, explaining the situation. As she talked, Walking Bear could see the 3 hunters approaching through the smoke, leading their horses and looking around carefully. "They're here," Emma whispered, pressing close to Walking Bear's side. Mrs. Anderson looked down at the frightened child, then back at Walking Bear. "You've risked your life to protect this little girl. I'll be damned if I let those vultures take her now." She turned to her men. "Joe, take Emma inside and keep her hidden. Frank, get Sheriff Williams. Tell him we have kidnappers in town." "Ma'am," Walking Bear said quietly, "they will say I am the kidnapper. They will say I took Emma from her family. Who will the sheriff believe, them or me?" Mrs. Anderson met his eyes steadily. "He'll believe me, and he'll believe Emma. That's all that matters." The confrontation came sooner than expected. Jake and his companion spotted Walking Bear standing in front of the inn, and immediately began pushing through the crowd toward him. Their hands rested on their weapons, and their faces showed the frustration of men who had been outsmarted and didn't like it. "There he is," Jake called out loudly. That's the Indian who kidnapped the Crawford girl. Several people in the crowd turned to look, and Walking Bear felt the familiar tension that came when white people began to choose sides between one of their own and a member of his tribe. But Mrs. Anderson stepped forward before anyone could react. "That man," she said clearly, her voice carrying over the noise of the crowd, "saved a child's life and brought her to safety. The only criminals I see here are 3 men who have been terrorizing a little girl and her protector." Jake's face flushed red with anger. "Lady, you don't know what you're talking about. We're legally appointed bounty hunters and we're here to collect a reward for returning stolen property." "Stolen property?" Mrs. Anderson's voice rose dangerously. "Are you calling a 7-year-old child property?" The crowd was beginning to take sides now, and Walking Bear could sense the mood turning against the bounty hunters. But he also knew how quickly such situations could change, especially when racial tensions were involved. Sheriff Williams arrived at that moment, a tall, lean man with a badge pinned to his vest and a no-nonsense expression on his weathered face. He took in the scene quickly, his eyes moving from the bounty hunters to Walking Bear to Mrs. Anderson. "What's the trouble here, Sarah?" he asked Mrs. Anderson. "These 3 claim to be bounty hunters looking for Emma Crawford. This man," she indicated Walking Bear, "is the one who actually saved her from the raiders who killed her family. Emma is inside right now and she can tell you exactly what happened." Sheriff Williams studied Walking Bear for a long moment. "You're Modoc?" "Yes." "Been any trouble from your people lately?" "No, sir, I'm alone. My village was destroyed." Something in Walking Bear's tone told the sheriff volumes about what destroyed meant. Williams nodded slowly. "Let me talk to the girl." They all went inside the inn where Emma was waiting with Joe, the man Mrs. Anderson had assigned to protect her. When she saw Walking Bear, she ran to him and took his hand, making her choice clear to everyone present. Sheriff Williams knelt down to Emma's level. "Hello there, miss. I'm Sheriff Williams. Can you tell me what happened to your family?" In a clear, strong voice, Emma told the entire story. The attack on the wagon train, hiding under the wagon, Walking Bear finding her and promising she would be safe. She told about their journey, the lessons he had taught her, the way he had protected her from the bounty hunters who wanted to hurt her. "Walking Bear saved my life," she concluded firmly. "He's been like the big brother I never had. He promised I would be safe and he kept his promise." Sheriff Williams looked at Jake and his companions. "You boys have any evidence to the contrary?" Jake sputtered angrily. "She's just a kid. She doesn't understand what really happened." "Seems to me she understands perfectly," the sheriff replied coldly. "Now, unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, I suggest you move along. We don't take kindly to people who threaten children in this town." The bounty hunters realized they had lost. Without Emma's cooperation, they had no claim to any reward, and the entire town was now aligned against them. They left, grumbling threats that carried no real weight. In the days that followed, as arrangements were made to contact Emma's uncle in Salem, Walking Bear and Emma spent their time helping the town recover from the fire. Walking Bear's knowledge of plants helped him gather medicinal herbs for those who had been injured, while Emma charmed everyone with her courage and spirit. When Uncle Thomas finally arrived from Salem, tears streaming down his face as he embraced his brother's daughter, he had only gratitude for Walking Bear. "I don't have enough words to thank you," he said, gripping the Modoc warrior's hand. "You gave me back the only family I have left." Walking Bear looked down at Emma, who was torn between joy at being reunited with family and sadness at leaving the man who had become so important to her. "Will I see you again?" she asked him. Walking Bear knelt down and took her hands. "Perhaps someday. But you have a new life to build now, with your uncle and his family. Learn to read and write. Grow strong and wise. Remember the things I taught you, but also learn the ways of your own people. I'll never forget you," Emma promised. "And I'll never forget that you kept your word. You said I would be safe, and I was." As Walking Bear watched the wagon carrying Emma and her uncle disappear down the road toward Salem, he felt both loss and fulfillment. He had lost another person he cared about, but this time it was to life and hope, not to death and destruction. Mrs. Anderson approached him as he stood watching the empty road. "You could stay here, you know. This town could use a man like you." Walking Bear considered the offer. It was tempting, a chance to be part of a community again, to have a place where he belonged. But he looked toward the mountains where his scattered people might still be wandering, looking for a new home. Thank you, he said. But I think my people need me more than your town does. Mrs. Anderson nodded, understanding. If you ever change your mind, you'll always be welcome here. Walking Bear gathered his few possessions and began walking north, toward the mountains and an uncertain future. But for the first time since his village had been destroyed, he felt hope. He had learned that kindness could bridge any gap between peoples, that courage could be found in the smallest person, and that sometimes saving someone else was the first step toward saving yourself. Behind him, the town of Cascade Falls continued its recovery, and somewhere ahead, a little girl was beginning a new life, carrying with her the strength and wisdom of two very different worlds. And Walking Bear smiled as he walked, knowing that some promises, once made with love, echo through all the years that follow.